Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. And welcome to the first installment of everything I missed from April 2020. From here forth, this is going to be a monthly series where every month, slightly after the month ends, I am going to be recapping all of the things that I didn't get to talk about, either missed entirely or just didn't think that the video was worth doing, so on and so forth, from the month before. So without any further ado, let's get into the singles. First single being Juice WRLD, Rightous. My apologies for starting on such a sad note. It's just that I didn't really want to kill the momentum and I just kind of wanted to start this off paying a little bit of respect. This is Juice WRLD's first posthumous single, and posthumous releases have been something that I have had a very mixed experience with so far. Some of these really seem like greedy cash grabs. I feel like a great example of this was the two posthumous albums that we received from X after his death. I do think that this was handled really well. From what I can tell, they are donating the profits of this song to charity, which is a great cause. And I really appreciate the level of respect that they are treating his posthumous work with so far. We're gonna have to see how it all pans out. It's just that so far, it's been very respectful. This song features an acoustic trap type beat, which is nothing particularly out of the ordinary for a Juice WRLD song. A lot of this track is his tried and true formula that always worked really well. This is even maybe one of the best examples of it though. His singing on this track is very cathartic and has a large amount of flow and progression to it. The song itself has a really great progression to it as well. As his vocal passages change throughout the course of the song, the instrumental builds or falls off at all the right places to make this sound amazing. This song goes just hard enough to still be relaxing, which is a really solid mix to hit. The lyrics on this track are also just haunting. Absolutely haunting, and it's so sad to see someone lose to drug addiction like this. Whether it was an accident, whether this, that, or the other thing, we'll never know, but Jared talking about his drug problems and even talking about the fact that he doesn't know if he's going to die young or not is incredibly haunting on this song. And really just looking at it now, like, I mean, I wish people would have known. But I'm really glad that they're treating his unreleased work with lots of care and respect so far. I hope that it stays the same. I hope that this ends up being much more along the lines of the Mac Miller project that we saw come out, and it gets handled with care. Drake, Toosie Slide. Well, this is on a much brighter note. People have said a few different times already, and I've heard this a couple times, that this song is really something that's just made for TikTok or similar things, and I can't help but agree with that, but damn, it's catchy. It's catchy as hell, just like most things that do blow up on TikTok. The beat on this track is pretty typical. It's nothing super innovative or new, but it does have a really heavy, nice bass line to it, and the mix on this track is phenomenal, which of course you would expect nothing less from Drake. Usually I'm not a huge fan of this more dance-oriented type track, except this one has just enough fun to still be enjoyable, and you can still kinda take it seriously, like for what it is anyways. A little too simple, yeah, maybe, but it's still a really fun track. Of course, I am aware that this is connected to a new project as well, and if you guys are interested in seeing me cover that, I am going to cover it. I'm not sure at the current time being if anyone's really gonna want to see it though, so I'm a little bit mixed on it. After hearing this song and having a pretty decent amount of fun with it though, I'm really kind of curious to see what else is in store for us on this project. I'm going to be listening to it on my own one way or the other, but let me know if you guys want me to bring you on for that journey. Gorillaz! Aries. As someone who's been somewhat mixed on the last few Gorillaz projects, I am very excited to say that this new Song Machine project that they have is turning out to be very promising. This one features Peter Hook, and his sonic influences on this song are very strong. He might be influencing the sound of this more than Gorillaz are themselves. This track is very heavy on the atmosphere with droning guitars, repeated mantras, and some very classic sounding synths that progress pretty well as the track progresses. It's a really immersive mix, and it's something that grabs you into its mood pretty well. This is a really interesting sound to hear from them, and it makes me all the more curious to see what else they've got going down the line. Kid Cudi, leader of the Delinquints! Kid Cudi, the man, is back at it again with a new single. This one's titled Leader of the Delinquints, and pretty fire it is. Yeah, this song grew on me a little bit, even just from the first time hearing it, so I guess I'm glad I didn't end up doing a reaction video to it. The production on this track isn't really something that's all that special, but it's pretty gritty, pretty dirty. We got these gritty drums on here, the heavy bass line, of course, some subtle keys in the mix. A pretty atmospheric mix, and I apologize for using that word so much in this video. It's really Cudi on this track that makes it work though. His flow is pretty cold on this one. Goes pretty hard if I do say so myself. And I just did. You heard it here. Go check out this new Kid Cudi song. One of my favorites. Earl Sweatshirt! Whole world! Earl is back at it again with a somewhat unexpected new single featuring Maxo. Even though this is a somewhat dark track, it is pretty much as bright as the cover that accompanies it for Earl's standards. This is one of the clearest mixes, especially on the vocal end, of any Earl song that I've heard in the recent times. You can actually make out all of the vocals with reasonable proficiency. Not gonna need a lyric read along when you hear this one. Everything on the beat is pretty bare bones here, from the repetitive bass line to the plucky melody that carries it along, but of course it's really the lyrical content where this track stands out, as typical on a Earl song. Not only does it stand out, it lives, breathes, and thrives lyrically. Both on the verses from Maxo and Earl, they're talking about some very dark topics, having some very poetic but depressive lyrics on here. There's a lot in the lyrical department to sink your teeth into on this one, and that's the most enjoyable aspect of it. While sonically I wish there was a little bit more meat on the bones, I did still appreciate this track for what it was. Pretty decent one, and I like it better than everything on his Feet of Clay EP by a pretty reasonable margin. So I'm glad to see where this progression is going. Charli XCX! Claws! After killing it last year with her record Charli, somewhat of a self-titled I suppose, Charli XCX is back at it again, making some more killer music. If Claws is any indication, this is going to be even better than her last release. This release that she's got coming down the line, I think towards the end of this month. I'm a little bit biased to like this track because I am already a huge fan of 100 Gecs. And if you were unaware, Dylan, one half of 100 Gecs, is the producer on this track. And it sounds just like a Gecs song, and I love it so much. For me, 100 Gecs is one of the most interesting music acts that has came around in modern times. They're crazy mixes of sugary pop music along with heavy, distorted electronic fusions that all end up being very climactic, epic, and inspiring to the ears. Charli, of course, does a great job on this song as well outside of the production. The way that the styles mesh here is absolutely flawless. I'm a pretty big fan of the way that this one in particular turned out. Charli XCX! Forever! Yeah, it's been a pretty busy month for Charli, and she's killing it on both of the songs she put out. This song does still feature production that is a sweet, sugary mix of hard electronics with a very sweet pop sound. AJ Cook and BJ Burton still provide some pretty decent production on this track. It's definitely nothing to scoff at and really ends up being very similar. The lyrics on this track are also very sweet and hold true to the aesthetic. Similarly to the last song that I talked about, this one manages to be somewhat weird and off-kilter while still being very pop-centric, very catchy. Charli is really 2 for 2 in my eyes, and this new project that she's going to be putting out should be pretty phenomenal if these are any indicator. But speaking of Gecs and Charli, 100 Gecs! Charli XCX! Rico Nasty! Kero Bonito! Ringtone! Remix! Damn, that's a lineup. Just when I thought Ringtone couldn't have been any more of a banger than it was, this dropped. So I could get into the nitty gritty of it, but I'm just gonna say, if you like the 4 artists on that list, you are going to love this song. I'm probably the most a fan of Rico Nasty's contributions to this track, but having Charli sing the hook was a really nice addition as well. I'm really not sure what to think of Kero Bonito's contributions to this track, and I'm not really sure what to think of their music either. I suppose that Sarah's somewhat nursery rhyme-like vocals really kind of fit into the aesthetic. I don't know that I would like it in other songs, but I think here it works for the most part. 100 Gecs! Dorian Electra! Gec to You! Remix! Well, I did the other one, I gotta do this one too. It is so cool to see this like circle of experimental pop artists getting together like this. These are all the people on the cutting edge, and if these guys are any indication of what music is going to be like soon, I am all for it. This version of the song is barely similar to the original, so it's really its own standalone piece in a lot of ways. So I'm a little bit conflicted on which version I honestly like better. With the 2 artists on this track, it really could have gone a lot worse, but it wasn't gonna go badly no matter what. This is a totally different version of Gec to You, and I'm really not complaining because this Dorian Electra led version is really, really nice on its own. And that climactic bass drop at the end, that is what I come to Gecs for. 100 Gecs! Square Garden performance! Okay, so maybe Charli isn't the only one who's had a busy month. Wow! This is great. This is really good. I loved this. I loved this as much as I loved their actual album. Now, it would be much nicer if I could actually split this up into individual tracks, and if it gets released like that soon, hopefully, I will probably do a full-length review on it, and I will also obsess over it for the following month. Damn, I want to go to another Gecs show when this quarantine is over. Dua Lipa, Future Nostalgia. Dua Lipa's new record was creating a lot more buzz in the music scene than I would have really anticipated for what I initially accepted to be a somewhat sterile pop record. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and say that I was entirely wrong with my original interpretation and assumptions, but as the month has gone on and I've heard this record a few more times, I have gained a bigger appreciation for it. I think that the whole future nostalgia concept is played up a little bit and people are giving it a little bit more credit than it's worth. I understand the whole point is to mix futuristic and nostalgic or retro sounds together to create this sort of revivalist piece that feels both grounded in the past and the future, but I think that the execution could have been a little bit better, a little bit more ambitious on that front, because really a lot of it feels way too grounded in the present to give me that full vibe that it's going for. However, all that aside, even if this isn't as ambitious or adventurous as it seems to think it is, I do enjoy this as the very catchy, fun pop record that it is. Physical, Levitating, and Hallucinate are definitely some of my favorite pop songs of the year so far, if not my favorites. These are all really catchy, great anthems, and I'd say that most of the other tracks on here really exemplify the same qualities. Most things on this record are either good or great. I just wish that it didn't close on its absolutely most stale notes that are good in bed and boys will be boys. Nothing's really all that impressive about either of these songs, and it's pretty easy to pick up on the unlikable qualities of them. I'm not gonna say everybody's gonna hate these songs, but I definitely am just gonna stop the album at track number 9 and pretend it ends there. And if you do that, it's a great little pop record. Awesome even. 7- out of 10 on this. Not perfect, but really good for what it is. Westside Gunn! Pray for Paris! Westside Gunn of the Griselda Collective is always the least interesting link in the chain for me. I think that a lot of Griselda really could use a little bit more innovation, a little bit more inconsistencies, because all of their songs end up sounding way too similar to me. But Westside Gunn himself has really always felt like the strongest example of where they really need to have a little bit more variety. The Westside Gunn formula up until this point has been really, really similar to each other. Once you've heard one Westside Gunn song, you've probably heard most Westside Gunn songs. He has a very formulaic mix of a very cartoonishly dramatic delivery and ad-libs that are just really off the wall and kind of catch you off guard the first time, but end up being really, really repetitive after a while. Of course, he raps over somewhat 90s boom bap feeling beats, as the rest of the Griselda Collective does. And of course, his lyrics are also very, very samey across a lot of projects. He talks a lot about flexing designer clothes, money, drug dealing, violence, guns, street shit, etc. Nothing particularly new, but it definitely fits the vibe that Griselda is going for in general. But I'm really happy to announce that this is the most change of pace record Westside Gunn has put out, at least as far as I've heard. There's actually some introspective moments on this record, and there's a lot more change of pace in the production too, exploring a lot of different sounds that he's never really touched on before. The variety doesn't really stop there, as this continues to become one of the most engaging projects from Westside Gunn because of all the features that happen on here. Some very big names, from Tyler the Creator to Joey Badass, actually giving an appearance here shows that Westside Gunn is really working his way up in the world, I guess. I think that there's a lot of really solid features on here, and it keeps everything fresh, really stops it from sounding stale at any point. This isn't perfect by any means, and there are definitely some moments that lose me, and some songs just being more samey and less standout than the other ones. Of course, that's still somewhat present, but really much less. And I do really think that the tracks that Westside does with the other guys from Griselda, Benny the Butcher most notably making some of the best tracks on here, really does spice up the track listing, kind of gives it that Griselda feel, that grit that they like to go for. Yeah, I think this is the most progression we've ever seen out of Westside Gunn, really. It's certainly taking a lot of steps in the right direction and makes me excited to see where else he's going with his music. 7- out of 10 on this one as well. Dababy, blame it on baby. It's really not hard to remember, even 2 years or even really 1 year back, when Dababy was one of the freshest faces in new music, putting out some really interesting stuff and having a lot of people really compelled to see where his promising career would go next. Then over time, as he appeared on pretty much everyone's album, I guess, really had the same flow way too often, like suspiciously often, and people really started to get tired of that gimmick, of his gimmick, as many other trendy rappers have also fallen. And he put out his record Kirk last year to a similar reception, with many of these criticisms carrying over to that project. And it's all been downhill from there. Now, Kirk was actually a project where I think it had some bangers. I think it had some good tracks. Really is a song that I come back to all the time to this day. It's still on a lot of my playlists, honestly. It's a good song. It's a bop. alright. However, there are very few tracks on here that I would shed any kind of favorable light on. There are 3 types of songs on this album. Ones that go kinda hard, but are way too long. Ones that go kinda hard, but are way too short. And ones that are completely unlikable regardless of their length. The common thread between all of these songs being the lyrics are absolutely atrocious. This man deadass said on the title track, usually what ends up being the most important track, he says, "Special ed, yeah, I'm a Riri." What? So that's a thing. Jesus Christ, what got us here? It wasn't even a joke either. It would have been distasteful. Would have been really distasteful if it was a joke. But it wasn't even. It was just out of nowhere. Just making a joke about the word retard. Just because it's edgy, I guess. And the lyrical landmines on this album do not stop there. Honestly, getting through this record is really like walking through somebody's yard after they didn't clean up after their dog for multiple months. We've all been there. You know what I'm talking about. I know what you're talking about. We've been there. And even though the last lyric that I brought up might be the stinkiest shit you walk into, trust me, it does not end there. This yard is covered, folks. Now, if you can just kind of manage to turn your brain off and vibe, I guess I can see where some people might like the song on here with Young Boy Never Broke Again, which is, of course, a match made in heaven. I guess this one really kind of falls into the goes kind of hard but is way too long category, but it's pretty much the best one in that category, so I guess I'm not going to complain about it too horribly much. But there's very few things to like on here. I never thought that I would recommend his previous album, Kirk, but yeah, 2 out of 10 on this. This is some hot, stinky fucking garbage. Rina Sawayama. Rina Sawayama is finally returning after her 2017 EP titled Rina, and her long-anticipated debut album is here, finishing up kind of the self-titled duo that these 2 projects are. This album knows little in the way of boundaries when exploring different genres, and it's really compelling to see everywhere that it goes, from electropop to stadium rock to heavy metal. Rina produced a really quality piece on this album. It is all-encompassing, innovative, emotional, and masterful. There's so much lyrical work that's all very tastefully executed that I just don't really know where to start with it. Rina on here talks a lot about friendships, relationships, stories from her past, her culture, and many more topics even so. It all translates actually very relatably and down to earth, which it could come across really pretentiously, so it's nice to see that it never really does. This album is very rarely hit or miss. It hardly misses a single beat, except I'd say when the Fuck This World interlude comes across, the 2 tracks that follow that as well do have some moments where they're either a little bit too subtle, a little bit not ear-grabbing enough, or they're just a little bit obnoxious. Yeah, these 3 tracks right back to back here are kind of the only ones that I'd ever give a skip to. But even these songs are really great, and I wouldn't blame anyone for liking them a whole lot. And what little is lost in the structure of these songs is strongly reciprocated on the closing moments of this album. These last 2 tracks are by far the best way you could end an album. This is one of my favorite closing moments on an album that I have heard. Yeah, there's a lot that's really, really fantastic about this record. I wish that I could go into more detail about it, but in these short segmented reviews, it would be really hard to explain more than I already have. So if anybody would actually like to see me still do a full-length review on this, make sure to let me know in the comments. You know, if there's interest, I definitely want to do it. I want to talk more about this record. But, you know, I'm sure I'm going to get to talk about it on the year-end list anyways. 9+ out of 10 on this one. Almost perfect. Bones and Drew the Architect. Damaged Goods. Yeah, Bones is probably going to be a recurring character on these segments. You might actually see him in just about every episode because every time I turn around, the dude's got a new album out, and for me to do a full-length formal review on every single one of those would probably be damn near impossible, first of all, and very repetitive, second of all. So even though I'm a huge Bones fan, he's usually going to probably end up on this segment. Now, not to say that Bones never does anything interesting, because that would be a lie. He does innovate a little bit, but he usually sticks to his typical style. And that's really okay, because he's got his own lane carved out. So, knowing a lot about Bones as a rapper and Drew as a producer, I figured this was going to be somewhat like their other collaborations, a more environmentally mixed product of what Bones usually sounds like, with some weird, trippy, lo-fi, atmospheric qualities. Little did I know what I was getting into. Instead, what we got on here is pretty much a homage to 80s and 90s synth pop. But the weird point with it is that it isn't really a fully committed reference to that style of song. Like, you definitely hear a little bit of disco here, you hear some 80s and 90s pop, but it's never like all the way, because it still has that sesh grit to it, that certain edgy attitude where, you know, it's unmistakable. You guys know what I'm talking about if you've listened to Bones. But if you're really unfamiliar with what you're hearing, the weird part is it kind of ends up sounding like one of those weird YouTube atmosphere remix things. Like, I don't know if anybody else has traveled down this rabbit hole, but like, hold up here. You got things like Joji slow dancing in the dark, but you go into a bathroom to cry at a party. Or, Hey There Delilah, but it's played in an empty Toys R Us at 2:37 p.m. with moderate traffic outside. Yeah, that's an actual thing. Honestly, it's kind of interesting. These have always been like weirdly intriguing to me. So really with this Bones record, it's kind of like you're having these weird atmosphere remix things happening where, you know, it sounds a lot like that, very reverby, echoey, kind of spaced out, washed out, not as punchy as a regular pop song, especially from this era, would be. And really my biggest problem with this album is that it fails to commit to these ideas fully. These songs could really do a whole lot in the way of structure. Some hooks would be so appreciated. And I understand Bones songs don't usually have hooks, but they usually don't sound like disco either. Some variation might be a little nice, because honestly halfway through this thing I kind of start to space out because everything starts sounding the same. And as oddly dedicated as a lot of this thing seems to the style and aesthetic that it's going for, the track PvP is like a regular Bones hyped up banger type track. Don't get me wrong, goes hard. Goes really hard. Like, I remember the first time I heard Rest in Peace. He can still pull this shit off, like, really well. These faster, more heavy-hitting songs that Bones does sometimes, they're great. But I don't really see why one's on here, especially 3 tracks in. You're just killing the momentum before you've even barely got any. Overall, if you're coming to this album for the ambience and the vibe that it's providing, especially if you skip PvP and leave that for your other playlists, you're probably very rarely going to be disappointed. And I know that I really did enjoy it for its vibe, its aesthetic. It's somewhat unique, and I did appreciate that. But really, as a Bones project, there's been a lot more solid work in the past. Feeling about a 6- out of 10 on this one. But really, that could either grow or shrink on me. I found a lot of times with Bones projects that listening to them in different settings or different environments at different times with different moods kind of changes my opinion on them entirely. So it's hard to say, especially when I can't really do much with any other people right now. Thundercat, it is what it is. Jeez, dude. Between the Dua Lipa, Eve's Tumor, that Bones record that I literally just got done talking about, and now this one, I'm beginning to feel like April was a month-long Throwback Thursday. That aside, I really think that Thundercat's new album really scratches that vintage itch the best for me out of all of these LPs. Because, dude, there's nothing like reminiscing about a time before I existed. those were the days. Just because it's maybe most effective in that area, though, doesn't really mean that it's my favorite of the bunch. That still probably goes to Eve's Tumor. That was a really phenomenal record. But I digress. I am just really impressed with how cohesive of a piece this feels like altogether when Thundercat is clearly pulling from such a large variety of genres and influences and has so many features on this record as well. However, it would be somewhat impossible to imagine Thundercat executing this poorly because he's done this sound quite a few times at this point. Really not his first rodeo with it, so it makes perfect sense that this would be a somewhat well-mastered version of that. Unfortunately, that does mean that it shows very little in the way of progression, and I think that's something that he could probably work on the next release. The mix on here can be kind of shoddy as well. Sometimes it feels intentional to kind of give that vibe that I was previously mentioning. Usually it just feels like it could have been mastered a little bit better. And I also feel like there's some somewhat unnecessary songs on here. Maybe this track listing could have been a little bit trimmer. All that being said, as I previously said, this album is really cohesive. And it's strongly cohesive in that way. And there is a really good rhythm and flow in between each song, and it all flows into each other really well. There's not really any songs to dislike here. I think that they all have pretty good aspects. It's just that there's not really specific ones to like either. All things considered, Dragon Ball Durag is probably still the best song on this. And if you really like that song, you're pretty much going to get a second helping or maybe just leftovers of more of that same sound. But if you're expecting anything better than Dragon Ball Durag, I would just stick to that single and kind of stray away from the rest of this. If you like the vibe, like I do, I think you can see where I'm coming from with a 7 out of 10 on this. AWOLNATION, Angel Miners, and the Lightning Riders. Somehow only the second most confusing album title of albums that came out this month. I really hate how it's not the Angel Miners and the Lightning Riders. It's just something very inconsistent about this title, and it just kind of, it's really a mouthful. I'm not sure where did he come up with this? The Aaron Bruno fronted theatric rock, pop rock, electronic act AWOLNATION is back with another album. And yes, they do actually make music, not just the song Sail either. Which I think we all remember Sail and can really all agree that that's a pretty fucking awesome song. That's a killer track right there. And I really don't know that they have really reached that same level of ambitious rock ballad since that was the shit back in the day, dude. But after catching their set opening up for 21 Pilots last year on the Bonito tour, I was reminded that these guys exist. And while the AWOLNATION's strange and not very self-serious sound and style isn't really anything that I wouldn't call fun, it's fun. It's definitely fun. I just don't really see who it's for, I guess. And apparently looking at first week sales and how many people actually covered this thing and how many radars it flew completely under, apparently it's not really for anyone. This has the explosive pop elements that you find on something like an Imagine Dragons song, but it also has the gritty, heavy chug-along riffs that you'd hear on a variety of more accessible heavy metal bands that have a very stadium sound, say like Metallica for instance. So really you're kind of turning off the metal crowd with the pop aspects, and you're going to be turning off the pop audience with the metal aspects of it. So I'm really just perplexed as to where this is supposed to go. I personally don't mind it, but how many people do you honestly know, especially people who aren't like musically fanatic, that are actually into pop and metal? It's pretty few and far between. It does kind of seem very car commercially, if that makes any sense. very movie trailer sounding songs, I guess. And in a very advertiser friendly light, I could really see a lot of these songs being used. I wouldn't really mind them in that context, and I don't really mind them on their own either. I get a lot out of this that you could probably end up calling a guilty pleasure, I guess. I do use that term lightly, and it's not one that I take all that seriously, but, you know, it's somewhat derivative of a feeling like that, I guess. AWOLNATION does carry such a large and theatrical energy that it's kind of hard not to hear a lot of these songs and not jam out to them. It just feels sinful to not headbang at least a little bit. Slower cuts on here like California Halo Blue do carry some of the better and less ridiculous lyrics, I guess. With California Halo Blue especially having some of the best on the record, but I also don't really like the sound of these slower cuts. Honestly, I just take it or leave it. These ones are just more something along the lines of background noise to me. Tracks like Mayday, Fiesta Fever, I really enjoy that track, as well as the other ones on the record that it sounds like. Probably only a 6- out of 10 on this one, but I still thought it was pretty fun. Black Dresses, peaceful as hell. So everybody knows why people are checking out this album, of course. And of course, why I checked out this album is... Actually, I was scrolling through Album of the Year, and I saw on new releases on whichever week of this month that this had came out, and the cover was so fucking weird that I just had to give this thing a listen. Like, I wasn't going to let this fly under my radar, and I figured this was the only time ever I was probably going to be looking at that cover. I needed to know what it was about, so I bought it on Bandcamp, downloaded the files, and didn't listen to it until Anthony Fantano gave it a 9. Yeah, I kind of forgot about this. I was thinking about maybe doing a video on it since nobody else really had, but I never got around to that. So here we are. Damn, dude, I could have beat Anthony to the punch. Damn, I really should have gotten to this sooner. I really should have. This is a mind-bending, mind-altering release that knows no boundaries in terms of genre. Adorable and apocalyptic are two words that should never go together, but hey, when they go together on this record, I am absolutely loving it. The only thing I would begin to compare Black Dresses to is the aforementioned 100 Gecs that are getting a fuck ton of mentions in this episode, but really that's the closest thing I can think of. But this has a much heavier influence from metal. That's only a thing Gecs use every once in a great while, where a lot of the tracks on here are very heavy actually and very influenced from metal. The thing that's really crazy about this is when they're going from cutesy sweet pop music all the way to grindcore. Honestly, I think that they managed to sound really relatable in the lyrics, and it actually carries a lot of themes that, are pretty down to earth. And the lyrics are somewhat clever, they're compelling. Really, it's not anything like what you would expect. There is no way that I can legitimately go into the full details and logistics of this record without doing a full-length review. So this is another one where if anybody's interested in seeing this, make sure to drop a comment and let me know, because I would like to talk about this album in length. But yeah, I mean, hopefully I'm going to run into a few different times where I do get to talk about it again once again, as I said with Rina Sawayama's record. The only points that I don't really find perfect on this album are sometimes in the aspects of mixing. The mix on here can sound a little bit too compressed, a little bit too lo-fi for what they're going for, and I understand that this is a very small independent act, and I do not blame them for this. It's just that it is a quality that exists, and it's not exactly one of my positives that the mixing doesn't sound great all the time. Whose would it be? Some of the vocal effects come across a little too strong, but a little too strong is kind of the message this album seems to be going for, so I guess, take it with a grain of salt. Like I said, some slightly rough inconsistencies are to be expected from an act that is so new in the scene and doesn't have like major label backing or anything to that heavy of a degree, but hopefully, there's certain things that have led up to this one gaining more success. Hopefully people are going to take a much harder look at Black Dresses from this point forward, and I hope that this album leads to great things but surprisingly, I'm going to give a second 9+ out of 10 on an album here, because this is a really, really strong album. So yeah, that is all we are going to cover in this episode. If I missed something that anybody actually wants to see me talk about, like I said, just drop a comment below and I would be happy to talk about it. I'll give anything you guys want me to a listen, and I will, you know, just drop some thoughts down there. If you did enjoy the video, dropping a like on it would be extremely appreciated, because I have a feeling this one's gonna have a hard time reaching a larger audience, and that will definitely help that, as well as subscribing to the channel. That is always very appreciated as well. If you want to see more music related content coming down the line for you very soon, I've got plenty. But that is just about going to wrap it up for this one, and I will see you in the next video.